Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of On the Couch, where we talk about design and how it informs everything about a roleplay. And we mean everything. But we will talk more about what that means. But first, we want to go through the introductions. First off, we have our guest here, Otan. I'd like you to introduce yourself. What do you do? What kind of
Hi,
roleplay, etc.
hi. My name is Otan TeLijon. Some people might know me as Anti-Kythena. It's good to have multiple names that are not confusing at all. I guess, I call it LARPing because it is LARPing, but in VR, sort of people don't like to use the word LARPing. But I've been LARPing for about 11 years, I think. Um, I do a lot in real life. There's a local community of mine that I've been a part of since I was a teenager, which was nice. And so I run about 4 LARPs a year or help with ongoing LARPs or campaign LARPs, which are the episodic stuff that you might see in VR. And I do a bit of VR roleplay, but I've not really done anything this year. But I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. But yeah, I really like LARPing and tabletop and roleplay and all that stuff. And I don't know, it's been a big part of my life. Yeah,
11 years.
ish. I might have miscounted, but I think I was 16 when I did my first LARP, which is 11 years ago.
I'm just curious. Do you ever think back to how much has changed since you first started?
Um, um, yeah. I mean, okay. This is kind of funny. I accidentally killed LARPing in my city for 2 or 3 years. But
Oh,
brought it back. I mean, it
Oh,
didn't help. It didn't help that I misorganized something, and then COVID struck, and then after we were allowed out of our caves, I brought it back. So, so. But yeah, no, I don't know. Yeah, things certainly have changed. A lot of people and a lot of mechanics are certainly a lot better now. And attitudes, I guess, towards laughing. But yeah, no, it's good.
all right.
Pod.
Do we want to do introductions, Dylan, or do people know who we
you
are?
know, I kind of do because I did a very bad job of introducing myself last time. I kind of feel bad. I'm just gonna I'll just introduce myself like not awfully this time. Hi, I'm Silent. I've been doing VR chat roleplay exclusively, as in like that sort of roleplay only, and not LARP or anything else, for approximately 3 years, almost 3 years. It's 3 years and like 2 months from now. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's been kind of a wild ride. We've participated in some role plays. We've, you know, run some role plays, and yeah, I would say I'm a short role play enthusiast, and also a big fan of improv. And yeah, it's hopefully that's a bit better. Actually, it says something about what I do rather than
Cool.
just I role play sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know if I covered these last time because my short-term memory is terrible. But I guess I can, since I would be the odd one out if I didn't, right? Uh, so I'm Solus. Most of my time role playing has been in VR. Is where I actually kind of took an interest in role playing, and I too am a short role play enthusiast. But I very heavily kind of focus and lean more into the non-mechanical sort of stuff. So figuring out how to the kind of minimal amount of system necessary to make a roleplay work and what that looks like, and really focusing on kind of character interactions. That's kind of my shtick. Now I do want to note we kind of just talked about some design elements there, right? May have glossed over a little bit, but we basically just started talking about it there, like what kind of things go into a roleplay, how long a roleplay runs, what kind of mechanics are in it, what kind of systems are in it, and the frameworks that oversee how a roleplay does its thing. And that's what we're talking about today. And we're here to talk about a lot of things. Very broadly, we are here to talk about how far that rabbit hole really goes, how much of everything can be designed and what that actually means for the actual practical experiences, the real tangible things that people see, feel, and understand as they kind of go through a roleplay. And we kind of want to start that off by talking about the inspiration of the exact principle that we're talking about today. And that is a design principle by someone by the name of Johanna Koljonen, who is a very well-known designer, roleplay designer within the Nordic LARP space that has very famously gone to say, everything is a designable surface. And that can take a lot of meanings, right? So saying that everything is a designable surface but practically means that when you design something, there is some output, right? And that means that seeing things as a designable surface means that like you kind of open your mind to thinking, okay, well, if I did this thing to this space, then what kind of impact is that going to have? Like, for example, if you turn down the lights in a room, what is that going to do to the things that players do within that room? Like say, like an open space within like a bar or something. If you turn on the lights and then kind of put a screen up, right? What's going to happen? People are going to look at the bright screen. They're probably going to like feel more inclined to dance if there's music, right? These are things that influence how people react to things around them. And it's kind of a guiding thought to our thoughts when we kind of think about that.
I think the extreme example that was given, of course, this, Johanna does LARP in real life and not in VR, but the extreme example that was given was including the temperature of the toilet seats at your venue. That is also a designable surface, which I think is quite both quite funny, but also it's like you can design that if you so wish to.
It's crazy. Wow.
You know, that's
everything. Yeah.
It's very important, right?
I mean, like, I don't know. Like, you have your LARP, right? And let's say you're designing like a prison cell or something, right? Like, you want the toilet in that prison cell to be like just cold enough to be uncomfortable, right? Like, it'll add to the mood, right? I don't know. And anyway, that's not very VR. That specific example is not very VR applicable, but the idea is is the same. That like small details that you might not otherwise think about. Well, we should think about them because we can design them if we so wanted to.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess we did talk a little bit about like physical space. So we can kind of just dive into that, I suppose. So the first kind of major element of design that we want to talk about is the physical design of where you're role playing, right? Like what kind of areas are there? What kind of ways do they connect to each other? Even kind of the visual elements, like what's the visual theming of this place? Are there like a whole bunch of like strewn around props, or is it generally clean? Like stuff like that to consider within kind of looking at organizing a physical space. And we want to talk kind of foremost about like what this means for like different kinds of LARPing, right? Because I assume Otan here has quite a bit more experience kind of looking at the IRL LARP and what kind of like design concerns go into that. So I'm like, before I get into this, I want to kind of pitch your thoughts on like what kind of design concerns do you usually see going into like physical spaces of IRL LARPs?
Well, in in sort of like the real life spaces that we have used, we often use like university rooms, and so there's just an abundance of desks and chairs that we can sort of make any room into a labyrinth, or sort of divide half a room by just like putting tables in the right orientation. Some of the concerns, of course, are should people be standing on chairs or tables, particularly if they need to make a point in character. And so in real life, there's the safety of people actually getting hurt if something is like a little rickety or loose, where the fear of that is not too much in VR. Although in VR, I think the closest fear is breaking the immersion of things, because the disconnect of, I guess, reality in a VR space. There's not like a table in front of you in reality if you have a headset on, but there might be while you're in character. And so it's certainly in real life, we have to worry about, I guess, our physical bodies, more than anything else, and particularly what that means in relation to other people as well, because people are as much as a hazard as a chair upside down. Someone might trip on another person, and that,
Mhm.
and so we have to take, those things into account when we organize people into a room, or even a room to fit the people.
Okay, and that's like designed with the understanding of like people generally being in the same room. Like I'm a bit curious on like because with VR we tend to do a lot of really big things like big spaces, big landscapes and stuff, right? Like
The closest to what I do, I think, is more accurately described as parlor LARP, where it's like the same location every week. So if it's like in a grand fantasy world, we're always meeting in the King's Court. It's always the King's Court every week, rather than sort of like venturing off into sort of like the infinite forests of whatever fantasy name. We're always in the same location. But that does not necessarily mean that the orientation needs to be the same of the room that you're in. Just that you have to understand where you are in the context of both reality and also where you are in the role play itself.
yeah. I'm a bit curious. Like, do you feel like what kind of things do you have to account for that? Because you did mention like you obviously don't get to do those like kind of big forest adventures or whatever. So like the understanding is that like some of these things will happen like out of session, or there's some assumption of like you could say some things happen apart from it, but the real focus of the LARP tends to be like what happens. Excuse me, what happened inside the room, right?
Yeah, yeah. I guess this is quite applicable for a lot of things, but what happens inside of like the space that we have organized, right, is it happens in the way that the players influence it, and outside, if the GMs are organizing it in a such where they're having like fixed points in the timeline of thing to affect the role play, or players have downtimes that they submit where those actions outside of the session influence the actions within the next session. We have to take that into account as well. For the physical space, I think one of the worst things, and I love player choice, right? Players are allowed to do whatever they want, but a player leaving the space for a particular reason is sometimes a hard thing to deal with, because it does make sense that a player might not want to be in the room at this point in time, or they need to leave now as everyone in the room does not like them. And so while you are designing a space for them to exist in, you also have to take into account the room that they must not exist in afterwards, which becomes sometimes a hassle because you often don't prepare for it until a player needs to, I guess, like not exist in character. So there's quite a bit to both organize the physical space and the I guess abstract outside of that space.
I think that when I really like the comparisons of like looking at IRL kind of like parlor style LARPs versus like the kind of things we aim for in VR. We tend to like it's just I think changing a little bit more recently. But I still think like with the amount of like physical freedom that we have to make these sorts of like larger environments in VR that people tend to just kind of want those a lot more often, right? Like so we can make literally anything. We can shade it however we want. We're not even like confined by the way that light works in reality. Like we are literally tasked sometimes with like emulating that with like whatever engine we're trying to use, whatever shaders we're trying to use. But
Have your non-Euclidean spaces, buildings that are bigger on the inside than on the outside.
yeah, yeah, your little instance rooms where you click a door and instead of like the you know the 10 by 10 room that you just saw on the outside, you have a big old chamber, right?
Yeah.
So you can just like kind of bend reality a little bit even. But like there's also the funny issue of like because we can make everything that we want, we also have to make all of it, right? So this design space kind of becomes sometimes a bit of a crutch too.
Yeah, I guess you don't really have the the university room, right? Like the university room, like full of desks, might not be like the perfect space for like every single role play, but it's like there, and like you don't need to build the university yourself to like use it, right?
The most we do for like I guess set dressing, because we do need to clean up, right, is posters on the or even using the projectors to have I guess have like music in the background to sort of like simulate an aesthetic or a vibe. If it's based in the city, just put on like walking down New York City 10-hour time lapse video or whatever, and you'll get it'll help with the atmosphere, even if it is like just the same room. Where I think in VR you can just have a video player, import that with Udon, and you're good to go.
That's actually like I've had a few discussions recently about like music in VR roleplay, and I actually want to pitch this now that you mentioned it. That like the kind of use case that I was given in this conversation was that you have two players that are kind of experiencing this scene in very different ways based on like or at least supported by the kind of music that they were playing in the moment. Like one character who has like all of this power in a situation is like potentially playing this like kind of darker sort of theme that they might act on something that might be a bit more aggressive versus like the other character that might be playing like this clown music, right? Like they've been having a really fun session, they've been like kind of fooling around, they come to the situation and then they're like still kind of bolstered by this like really lighthearted sort of vibe that they're then pushing that, and then you have this sort of like disconnect sometimes. Is because we can do that. Once again, one of those things where VR and just technology in general being kind of networked allows us to kind of do these sorts of things, but then like design concerns come with that, right? So like the solution that was presented to me was like shared music, recognizing somehow what's going on within a scene and then having like a controlled sort of like shared kind of thing to support that, like if enough gunshots go on in a certain amount of time, then like music plays to accompany it, like kind of picks up the action of the scene. I'm wondering what y'all's thoughts are on that.
I
think it's-
think. Oh, go ahead, Otan. I have a tangent to the tangent, so.
Ooh.
I see. I think it is interesting to create like forms of disconnect. One of my favorite LARPs I've been in is a silent LARP where you get different prompts based on that are randomly assigned to you, but these prompts sort of create the disconnect because the only things you can communicate with each other are the actions you perform. Since you're limited to not speaking, and because everyone has a different prompt, they will interpret a scene differently. So I really like this idea of misinterpretation, but like on purpose to bolster a theme or an idea. And I think you can actually do this in VR. If you do, I think because you can have you can upload quest worlds, and desktop worlds, and you can make it so that there's a disconnect between them, unless they've like changed that. But I know you could do that in the past where
You don't even have to do that to make a disconnect between players.
I see because you could
Yeah,
you could just
in fact I would recommend not desync questions. That's how you can do that on purpose, like without actually breaking things.
yeah.
So
But yeah,
so before
I do
you
like the form. Continue. Sorry.
Sorry, I just want to say, like, before Sylvan goes on the tangent of a tangent, I wanted to say, like, Otan, that exact roleplay that you're referencing right now was my exact counterexample of like the potential value of like misinterpretation, and not like seeing it as like a break in cohesion, but like a representation of like what I believe to be like the biggest strength of roleplay, which is that like most media has a sort of like central point of view, right? You have you see the story told from one point of view, which is the only point of view that you get throughout the video or movie or book or whatever, and that's like the point that you're following. So that's why you have like that's why you have antagonists, because they are dependent on the point of view that you're following, right? Whereas with a role play, everything's sort of interpreted. So everything that you see, you interpret it as your character, and you as a player interpret it to inform your character. If something happens outside of that, then it doesn't really happen for you. It's not really part of your experience. That's another principle we'll get to further down the line, but that's like, something to think about, right? So that was kind of my example, is like, you could absolutely think of the music as like, this is the character's mindset, and you could absolutely describe it as like they have effectively gone into a situation with a very different understanding of what was really at stake, and then they got burnt for it. In this case, quite literally,
Yes.
with fire. So it's like you can absolutely have that be very compelling in a given situation, and I think it's like very hard to like find a circumstance where it wouldn't be compelling, unless the players are not like playing with some sort of like shared goal, and that to me evidences a different problem entirely.
Yeah.
All right, so for my tangent of a tangent here, so I guess we've already like brought up like 2 points here. Like first with the kind of like the safety, and like safety IRL versus like in VR, and like I would like to propose that, well, it's not that we don't really design our spaces, or like our physical spaces to be safe in VR, because like obviously the roleplay designer in our sort of online VR roleplay, and that there are sort of offline VR roleplays as well, that exist, but we're talking sort of we're talking about online VR roleplay here. In those spaces, the organizers or the designers in a roleplay literally cannot design the physical space for safety, because like, we have people from all around the world in different parts, right? There's literally nothing that the organizers can do. But I would argue that the participants can design their own space to be for safety. And I think like it's kind of like in the same vein with the music. There's an interpretation of the design informs everything that kind of suggested that the things that you don't design, like if you are a roleplay designer, the things that you leave out, the things that you do not design, well, you're not designing those things, but somebody else is going to. Anything that you leave empty, right? Anything that you leave empty will either be filled in via tradition, the traditions that are present in whatever community that you're a part of, or if in the absence of tradition, essentially you're leaving the players to figure it out for themselves, and then the players will become their own designers and fill in the blanks, right? Anything that's not anything that hasn't been designed by the organizers and is also not dictated by tradition is going to be designed and filled in by the players themselves. And in this case, like I think the music, right? I think listening to music and like VRChat roleplay is a great example where like most VR roleplays that I know of definitely don't have, you know, even if they do have sort of like music in the worlds, it's not like a core design of the role play, right? It's more of just like a background ambience or whatever. And so, I mean, yeah, naturally, I think players are going to take that empty design, empty design space and fill it in with things that they enjoy.
So this is like exactly why chill sessions tend to not be chill, right?
Yeah.
Chill sessions are basically the GMs have effectively said we're not filling in the space with plot relevant things, so you get to do whatever, and then with the design space, go ahead.
Yeah, we have given you a blank canvas to with which to do whatever you want, and then I mean, it does happen that kind of anxiety-inducing high stress events tend to like win against sort of calm and relaxing events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the something needs to happen sort of feeling. The something usually ends up being something disruptive, or some sort of disruptive, parentheses noun. I don't yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. If you leave the design space open, someone will design in it.
Yep. It's just a matter of who, right? And if it's not the organizers, then it's either it's either going to be up to the community at large or the individual players themselves.
Or this guy that's standing to our right, which I haven't made note of yet. So this don't worry about the construction going on behind us.
Oh yeah, that's Larry.
Yeah, Larry has given us the okay to film in here, so he's chill. Don't worry about him. He's just planning out this room. I haven't heard him say a word though. Yeah.
Yeah.
He hasn't said a word since we
my
got here.
signs. Yeah.
I think he's got like stage fright.
I believe in him.
Larry, you good?
I think he's thinking about designing this room.
Okay.
He gave us 2 blanks. We're good.
Okay. We can move on from that.
I just needed to look. I needed to check in. I need to make sure. So sorry, Neon messaged something in the chat. It's wild. It's very
not
wild.
Canceling this podcast for Larry. I'm sorry.
Canassel this podcast. We're not.
All right. Anyway, maps and size. We didn't kind of talk about that a little bit, but I guess I do have something. I do have some like interesting stuff to say about that, because like in my sort of like research, this is more to do. This, I suppose this is less applicable to like small single room sort of like parlor LARPs. But like one of the first things that we kind of like I kind of ran into this like myself, and then later, right, much later, I read the 2019 Nordic LARP book, which is on LARP design, and it kind of like had, I guess, confirmation of what I had experienced in the layout of the physical space that you have. And there's this it's like a very simple idea. The idea is that and there are a couple of points. First things first, people are going to generally meet at crossroads. What do I mean by crossroads? It's like if you have multiple paths essentially to get from point A to point B, and those paths converge, then chances are that that's where people are going to meet up, right? That's where characters are going to meet up with each other. So crossroads are a great place to essentially locate your points of interest. That's point number one. Point number two was, if you want to make it really hard for characters to find each other, then the way that you do that is by organizing your pathways in your LARP space. You organize them into loops. The bigger the loop, the more lost people will be. Because imagine like a big circle. You have two people who are looking for each other, and they're like on opposite sides of this big circle. And if one of them's going counterclockwise and the other one's going clockwise, then they'll eventually bump into each other. But let's say they're both going clockwise around the circle, they'll never bump into each other, right? So it's like a 50-50 at any given time. If you're going around the big loop, it's like a 50-50 that you'll just not bump into a person, essentially, if you're like looking for each other. And yeah, so that was like a thing. And I have to say, as somebody who the first roleplay map that I had a hand in designing was essentially one big loop. And I do have to say that people were constantly looking for each other, and this was a huge problem. And like it was a huge mystery of like, how do we solve this? People are just constantly looking for each other. And I guess it's kind of interesting to see that the thought that's been put into this.
I actually we talked a lot too after Warp ended, right? Of like what the design thoughts were in that, and I want you to, if you
Yeah,
feel...
I suppose the opposite of that, right? The opposite of one big loop is to have everything in one big straight line. If right, that's essentially, if you eliminate your loops, then that will make or theoretically make it easier for people to find each other. If you have like a straight flow, and the idea was there are kind of two there are two general design patterns. One design pattern is to have kind of like a straight line from point A to point B and put all your points of interest between point A and point B. And then option two is kind of like the star and spokes model, where you have the one big point of interest in the middle, and then things branch off in different directions from the big, from the town square, from your tavern or your meeting place. And both of those design patterns eliminate loops, and therefore, at least theoretically, make it easier for people to find each other. Worlds Apart, when we designed that map, a lot of the design that went into it was essentially, we essentially designed the map as a straight line from point A to point B. And a lot of the design work that went into it was disguising the fact that it's a straight line. For example, the town of Velis is almost a loop, except the loop is cut off via a large cliff right by the entrance. So like when you come in, the town essentially forms a circle, but you can only go around the circle in one of the directions because the other direction is a sheer cliff, so you can't quite go that way. And that was very intentional.
Definitely didn't stop at least a couple characters from trying to scale that cliff.
Okay, it heavily discourages them, right?
Yeah. I
does
get
heavily discourage traffic in that direction, and therefore you kind of eliminate that 50-50, right? If you do a loop around the town, you can be fairly certain that you didn't miss the person, essentially, right?
Mhm.
If you don't find them, you can. It's not 100% guarantee. Like there were people jumping off of that cliff, but like you can be more certain than if it was just than if there was no cliff.
Yeah, it was just a small jest. It's just very funny as the middle-aged, not very physically capable man setting up atop the balcony of that tavern, just kind of watching it happen. I enjoyed it.
I see.
So I am very, very, very tangentially related. You got your kind of like, I guess, your main walkways, right? Like the places you expect people to travel the most. And what I'm curious about too is like the places outside of that, right? So things that people generally won't walk to or will walk nearby, like things that are like purely just there for show. So actually, there's a small. I didn't catch on this when you said it, Otan, but you mentioned like using projectors. Um,
Yes.
and I'm curious, like what kind of goes into that? Like, is it usually like a kind of this is what people would see outside, and is kind of like just like a filling in the
But
blanks, or like
because we're mostly confined to whatever we can find on YouTube in the 30 minutes of prep that we have for the room, if the video does have, a video component to it, that does kind of somewhat help, even if it is not completely realistic. Like bringing up the example again of like it's an urban setting and there's just like a video of someone walking down New York City, but like there's all the chit chat that you would hear in an urban setting. You know, it's just glancing, I guess, at that does kind of help a little. Where there's supposed to be big buildings, there's supposed to be a lot of people walking, there's supposed to be an abundance of taxis down, a 6-lane road. And so the data projector at times does help, and it mostly depends on the video. And sometimes I have uploaded like ambience compilations on like an unlisted video to help, I guess, with that as well. But also to add an additional piece of add like a sneaky thing in there as well, because if you are making, I guess, like ambience to it, you do have full reign of what you put in that video. For example, a transmission cutting off the ambience music halfway through to shock all the players that the big boss has just, got interest in all the players. So you can have a lot of fun with the ambience, and it does help, I guess, with the immersion as well, with the data projectors and music and all that stuff.
yeah, controlling the pace through controlling the ambience. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can vibe with that. I'm always interested in like how role players use sort of like these set pieces and spectacle, because like it could very well be static. It could be just thing that bolsters the themes that people are going for. It could absolutely, especially with VR, like could be very heavily tailored, right? You could do a lot
It
of things mechanically. Go on.
it sounds a little weird, but like if you add like a lot of ambient stuff, like particularly if you're working on like the audio side of doing something for roleplay, if you add something that people don't notice in regards to ambience, then you've won. Because naturally you do make sound when you walk. There are birds chirping if it's like an outdoor area. If a car drives past, you would hear a car drive past, and so if you add, I guess, ambience that is so natural that a person would not consciously pick up on it. That is, I guess, a score for immersion, and that's,
Hmm.
I guess, part of the idea, you know.
I
Hmm.
I don't think I've ever heard it said that way, but
I see.
that you said when you say it that way, I'm like I'm nodding my head. I'm big time nodding. I fully agree. I have even gone on to say to many others that even if I would I think it's because I phrase it as even if people don't see it, then it's still worth
Mhm.
it. Kind of
Yeah.
thinking of it as a form of like the thing that naturally happens whether you affect it or not. But
Yes.
that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, man, this audio design is can be a bit challenging in VR once again because specifically VR chat doesn't give us a lot of tools to do specifically that. I mean, we have the ability to do that, but it can be quite challenging. As somebody who has spent literal hundreds of hours uh, trying to overcome the limited audio design,
Oh
but
no.
I mean, well, yeah, yeah. I won't get too far into it. Um, what I did want to talk, and this is like a thing. I suppose shout outs to Neon for kind of instilling the love for this design element into me. I wanted to talk a bit about facades, and kind of like facade. By facade, I mean like the thing that's behind the area that you're role playing in, right? Like the thing that's just over there, right outside the space. It's you see that mountain, you can't climb in, right? It's where we can't climb it. This is not not the Elder Scrolls, but it's there and it's kind of back there. This can come in the form, I suppose, of like you're in a city, right? You're in a city role play, and like you go up somewhere and you can just like see the rest of the city like stretching out, and you can see that there's more to the city than the small area that you're role playing in. Like that would be a facade.
Mhm.
um I saw a really good I saw a really good example of this recently in shoot, not on the tip of my tongue, Rosewood. Yes, one of Rosewood's recent maps I was watching, and they had essentially a new map. um, there's essentially a semi-invisible wall in the form of a big freaking lake that it's very obvious that you can't cross, right? Um, very obvious that that's the edge of the map. This is the shore, big lake. But on the other side of the big lake, you could see kind of little houses dotting the landscape. And then when it comes nighttime, um, the lights from the houses are actually like glowing, and I just thought that was really pretty, and not just really pretty, but also it's kind of like a suggestion of like, well, there's stuff, there is stuff in this world other than this small area that we are in, right? Without needing to bring it into the space, right? You can like realize the rest of the world without needing to make it part of the role play, or without needing to bring it into your center of the universe. um
When
I think
when when
facades are cool.
when I when I was running the campaign LARP that I was running in my city last year, I ran with like a sentence, and this sentence was mostly to inform players that uh, the world is real, and I kept reminding players that the world will exist even if you don't, because a world needs to be alive. It needs to have more people in it than just the characters or the NPCs or the mentioned only NPCs, and so I guess putting up illusions for players to uh, be completely present that there are real people in this world, even though it's a fake world, helps. So I fully support
Mhm.
and stuff.
I think
Or
it's very
yeah,
important though, to because a very popular way to inform the players that there is a world outside is to have like characters from the outside world come into the role play, or whatnot. I think it's really important to have things other than just that though, because like if all the characters from the outside world are coming to like your little corner of the world, then you really end up with the this place is just the center of the world,
this
feeling.
this is a bit of like an extreme example that we pulled
Mhm.
off a few weeks ago, but because we're basing a role play at the moment in 2008, we
Mhm.
had the recession happen,
Mhm.
and
Oh.
if you think about it, you think that that affected a lot of people and how players have been talking prior to when we revealed that, oh no, has anyone been looking at what time it is, because in real life we know that that happened, and so of course it happens in this role play to peer to that, where the people are now caring about all of these faceless, nameless NPCs who are suffering by events that we've done, like plotted in. Of course, it had to be something extreme, but you can do it with something smaller as well.
Mhm. That's pretty cool.
Mm. Yeah,
It's that good old implied presence.
yeah. Because again, the world needs to be alive. So of course, other things need to be happening that either they players can control or influence, or even not have any control over or any influence over. But it feels natural within the context of the world.
You see, this is one of those things where I keep getting back to this idea in like many different angles that I approach it with. But like the idea of like assumptions that we make about everything that kind of like we just don't think about. We don't think about like like you said, like footstep sounds, right? Like Thinking about like the sound that our feet make, the chirping in the background of birds outside our window, the way that light filters through a space and how it bounces around. We just don't think about many of those things, but when we're designing in a virtual space, we have to consider everything because we only really get two senses. We get our sight and we get our hearing, and that's it. We can't smell anything. We can't feel anything. We can't taste anything. So we have two senses to work with, and that means we have to figure out. We don't have to. I mean, we don't have to actually figure out everything about them, but we got to think about them at least. Like, how do we see the things that we would normally assume are happening, and then back to the idea of implied presence. Like, how do we know that people are around us, right? Well, we see lights on when it gets a little bit dark because people are in those homes. And we can just kind of brainlessly make that sort of assumption because of what we see. And it's like the simple indicator. Because we're just human beings, right? We can't reasonably keep track of literally everything that happens around us. That'd be very unreasonable.
Yeah, there are some things I think you can rely on the players to sort of like fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
For example, if you haven't designed a newspaper, which is something that would exist in most settings, or some sort of newsletter, but a player talks about it, they've sort of accidentally added a thing where obviously someone would have to have written that newsletter, and so a thing exists now based on players thinking of the things that you haven't thought of or the things that you haven't implemented yet.
Now that you say it that way, I don't mean to imply that you were saying it this way. I just realized we haven't specified. It's very important. The principle, right? The principle of Couchform is that design informs everything, right? And that's not to say that you have to design everything, right? Like that's absolutely not what we're saying. Design informs everything is literally impossible for any team, right? For any team designing any role play to actually think about everything, right? That is there are an infinite number of things to think about. You can't think of all of them, right? I suppose the core of this principle is not to like fill in all the blanks on behalf of your players, but rather to consider things that you might not otherwise consider, and might have taken for granted, right? I once again, I don't mean to say that you were saying that. It's just I just realized we actually haven't specified that.
No, that's fine.
And I do think that's quite important because, like, yes, player design, player design, players filling in the blanks, sort of the, whether it be theater of the mind or in some other way, is very much part of roleplay, and that's ideally, right? Ideally, as a designer, you can actually make that work for you, right? You can actually consider how to make player design work for you rather than work against you.
And also worth noting, something we also haven't talked about very much is like a lot of this also kind of informs like responsibility of like various things. When we say kind of informs everything, then we can also think the reverse direction of like if there is a pattern within a roleplay that you either did not expect or you do not exactly want within the roleplay. The first thing to think about is like, well, what could have possibly led to this? And the answer pretty much always is like there's something designed in there that has led to this. Something like for example, we have this one written down as well, which can segue into our next section here, is weapons, right? If a weapon exists, then it will be used, which means if you generally have your players resolving things with violence or leaning immediately toward like there is a problem presented, if we kill it, then the problem won't exist. Then you can then kind of look back like, okay, well, why would this happen? It might be because we have weapons here, and the part of the kind of thought of progression and moving forward as a character is getting better abilities and weapons. So that could very potentially lead to that, because that's what players are thinking about a lot, right? That's what they're focusing on. That's what they're building up to.
Mm.
So, that being a really good segue, I would like to then continue to that to talk about mechanics, mechanical design, systems, things that define how roleplay runs. And this can mean a lot of things. Uh, Basically, everything about how the roleplay is organized and how people play within it and decide things within it. But like a lot of that kind of is very informative of the experience itself too. So like one thing that we've kind of focused on a lot lately is like thinking about the runtime of a roleplay. In VR, we tend toward these like campaign style LARPs that run usually once a week, sometimes a little bit less frequently. And only recently, I think, have we kind of explored these sort of like more either parlor type or like actual one shot sorts of sessions where we do kind of confine it to either just one session or a very small number, and then just kind of leave it at that. We don't necessarily like need to explore these sorts of like long form progressions. But what I found very particularly is like it changes how players approach it very, very significantly. Um, just looking at the runtime, because for the very small and immediate example is if you are running something for a single session, then you essentially as a player are not beholden to another session of whatever the consequences are of the thing that happened in the first. So there's a lot less worry about like, I'll have to deal with this or I'll have to resolve this later on. That you just kind of have the thing where there is a bit of pressure to like kind of bring things to a close within the short time frame that you have. But there's a lot less pressure to kind of have things lingering because you don't necessarily need to resolve everything, right? So it's a weird mix.
I've found that one shots, particularly in I guess real life, and but also the one shots that I've either written or played in, where rather than not caring about, I guess, the next session, all your worries are confined to this one session where you will have maybe a thing to do, right? And that thing to do is one of two things that you really don't want to do, but not doing either one of them is the worst outcome. So you're sort of forced into a impossible situation of making one bad decision and one worse position, and both have consequences that are not necessarily immediate, but will certainly ripple and make its way back to you. And so, depending on how, I guess, how perhaps a single session or a one-shot LARP or roleplay is written, could sort of like see, I guess, all that stress and anxiety over the form of a 50-week campaign refined to 3 hours or less, based on how you, I guess, write it, write the character, write the setting, or even sort of expect how whatever grand problem of the one shot is supposed to be resolved within the small time frame that it exists within.
I think Nilu says, saying you've thought of everything is simply an invitation for players to find something you haven't thought of is a very good way to put it.
I think I would shorten it to players are the worst
Yeah.
because they will
Okay.
they will break everything you have planned.
What is this? No plan survives contact with the players, right?
Yep.
That's the sentiment.
Yes.
All right. I suppose I want to do a little bit of foreshadowing because I know the note game mechanics. That's a bit in the future, right? Today we're talking about design, but talking a little bit about mechanics today, right? So I want to do a bit of foreshadowing. Couchform's not actually anti-mechanic, right? We won't get into that today, but as a bit of foreshadowing, I did just want to ask, like, I don't know, do you have any like favorite like mechanics that you've seen in roleplay? Because I sure do. I can like go and click one off right now. This is not live action roleplay. It was actually a tabletop game that I found online called 10 Candles. Really good game. Highly recommend. I made a world to run this game in VR chat if it sounds interesting. Essentially, it's a storytelling game, and as the title would suggest, well, you have 10 candles, right? And it's a sort of shared storytelling game where, as you go through, there periodically there are decisions to be made, and um, when you make the decision, the players roll a number of dice, right? And the GM also gets to roll a number of dice. Um, the genius, the absolute genius design of this game is that the players roll one die for each lit candle. So for each candle flame that is still flickering, the players get to roll one die. For each candle that has been extinguished, the GM gets to roll one die. So like at the start of the game, players are rolling 10 dice and they feel really great because they're basically winning at everything. But as the game goes on, it's 10 candles. The candles are going to go out one by one as the game goes on, whether or not like by another mechanic or by literally the candle just burns out on its own, right? That's I guess part of the genius as well. The candles can burn out on their own for no reason other than, it just burnt out, right? Um, but then at the end of the game, when you're down to your last candle, and the players are all sitting around the table, and like they're like, "Oh shoot, we gotta roll a 6 because you succeed on a 6," and then the player rolls a 6, and everybody cheers, and then the GM is like, "Okay, well now it's my turn to roll," and then the GM rolls 9 dice in opposition to the player's one die, and they roll like 4 6s, and it just kind of like the hope is stripped away, right? And that's essentially what the game is going for, right? The game is sort of about hope, being snuffed out at the very end, and that is probably my favorite mechanic that I've seen. It kind of just implements that emotion through a mechanic. Anyway, that's it for me.
I think I like 10 Candles' approach to how it does storytelling, where it is both cooperative between the GM and the players, which I feel as though should be adapted to some degree within sort of most other forms of roleplay that aren't just tabletop, LARP and VR roleplay, because as much as a GM creates a world on paper, in praxis, it's players who are also contributing and existing within the world to adding to the story that was here first. So I love its cooperative sort of it's a cooperative way at storytelling. Because most of the mechanics that I have seen and experienced are from real life roleplay, I don't think I have any that can be adapted too much into VR. It is really funny to think of mechanics that we do need in VR, because VR is sort of a space where we can create a world and have avatars that are things that are just not applicable in reality, but they're still sort of a problem of trying to implement it into VR. You can't fly in real life, so you have to make a mechanic for if you're a superhero who can fly. And in VR, there may be a bit of a workaround, but else you might need a mechanic, or at least some sort of interface on the avatar of the world to make this possible. I think the favorite mechanics that I have had, particularly for real life, is non-contact combat, and that's mostly for safety reasons, as not everyone wants to actually fight each other, even when they really want to fight each other, because people might get hurt, especially if people get carried away. Full stop.
Yeah, it's full stop. I'm like, what kind of takes the place of combat in that sort of situation? Like,
We will often do paper, scissors, rock, because that is like one of the easiest ways to deal with it. It's one of the quickest ways, and it often does not require a GM. And mechanics, when they do exist, it should be so easy that you do not need a GM there, because a GM there means a GM can't be elsewhere for perhaps if something is much more urgent of a GM, or if GMs are taken up by having been playing NPCs, and so combat is often restricted to a bit of a paper scissors rock. Defender wins unless on your character sheet it says that you break ties, of which someone might has you break ties even if someone else is supposed to, so the mechanics are very much written in stone on paper.
Yeah, that's like very much the opposite of what I've seen across a lot of VR role plays. Because like a lot of the general consensus that I've heard from a lot of people is like whenever combat happens with team players, the GM must be there. There must be some sort of arbitrator, and that to me is like there can only be so many GMs. There can only be so many combats going on, and that means other things that are going on during the combat. You could have someone waiting like 15, 20 minutes, which I've had to do a lot of times if you really need that sort of like arbitration for something that you're just not sure about. Well, now you got to wait.
Depending on the player, and by that I don't mean any specific person. I mean specific. I mean a very specific type of player, or particularly one who likes to win. It does get a little hard if the winner loses.
Yeah, I suppose that's like, this kind of leans into my reason for disliking the like D&D D20. Right? Is that like the moment you start to introduce like a way to decide how the outcome goes in any given scenario. First of all, you have to choose when that happens. Which in the case of like designing around combat, like you could kind of strictly make it a combat roll. So it's like just kind of confined and guaranteed within the space. But then like other things like maybe skill checks or like, response from an NPC. Like maybe you try something and like how they respond depends on that. A lot of times this kind of creates this sort of like dynamic of, well, no matter what you try, there is a chance for it to fail if you roll for it. And that chance to fail also depends on something that is a flat, uniform probability.
Yeah.
And how people generally make up for that is like, well, I have given these players bonuses now. So some lower rolls are just not possible to hit now. Or you have like the advantages or whatever have you. And it's like you're basically like mitigating that like the character can still fail in the exact same way. The player can fail in the exact same way because realistically, getting a less interesting outcome because of random chance means the player is kind of losing out too.
I feel as though when it comes to winning and losing, it's always exciting to win something. It never not is exciting winning unless you just constantly always win. It becomes trivial to you. Where I think people should not be scared of losing, because there is sort of stories to be said from someone who keeps losing or loses battles they really want to win, where they keep sort of like a training, or they recruit the help of friends or whatever, to finally best a fight that they've lost 8 times now, and the the excitement of finally getting there could only be achieved because they lost. And so there shouldn't be a fear of failure by players when it does happen, particularly if it comes in the form of combat or other skill checks, of course.
Yeah. Like the way I like to think of it is like the moment you win, you have effectively resolved the situation. And once you resolve the situation is over. So like why not explore what the situation has to offer before resolving it? Right?
I'm gonna have to remember this one, because like now that I'm thinking about it, like I'm trying to build like a library of like different design stuff, and I guess that's kind of what we're talking about here right now. I've personally participated in roleplay where like combat was heavily GM'd, and like individual hits were rolled for, and like it's the GM was essentially the arbitrator of what happens. I've also played in a lot of role plays where the combat was sort of like very freeform, and it was entirely up to kind of players and like players' trust as to like whoever as to like who wins, right? I've also seen the sort of like the freeform. We trust the players to decide essentially who succeeds. And there have been like mixes between those two things, right? Where like some sessions are like both GM'd, and like anything that's not GM'd, players should figure out. But what I certainly haven't seen is like a specific mechanic for who wins that doesn't require a GM to be present, like the rock paper scissors. So like I actually find that really interesting because I don't think I've seen in this space yet.
I feel as though rock paper scissors is a little hard check to do in VR.
Well, yeah. Okay, sure, but I'm sure we could like you could do something else, right? Like I'm sure you could come up with something else. It's just I'm talking about like a style of mechanic where it's like
yes,
there is a clear victor as defined by whatever mechanic it is,
hmm
but that mechanic is not GM rolling dice.
yeah. There
Um,
there was a form of combat that I implemented last year where combat was much more social than it was, I guess, active. Where someone would yell "draw," people would point their guns to each other, and within the next 60 seconds, someone's either going to shoot. But certainly within that 60 seconds, people are going to try and convince people to not shoot, and also analyze how many guns are being pointed at them right now to do the maths of will I survive 1 or 2 rounds of combat? Is it worth it? And so you can perhaps, I guess, redefine, I guess, how combat could work to at least have it mechanics light, or the mechanics influence much of the story or the narrative, particularly if that is a much more, I guess, poignant thing within the roleplay.
oh my gosh, the Western standoff. I want to do that now.
Oh no, I have changed VR roleplay forever.
Yes, whenever that Western roleplay finally grazes our VR headsets.
You should take notes.
I see.
Someone's gonna do it. Someone's gonna finally run that Western.
Fine.
You should take notes from that and just like, man, like that scene where it's like, yes, you have 60 seconds to convince everybody else to not shoot. Like,
Yeah. It does lead to tense moments because if everyone's pointing guns at each other, you really either have to quickly make a decision or quickly make your point clear. And, it's not easy either choice.
So I'm reminded of like, speaking of like self-determining systems, I'm reminded although the situation surrounding this was fairly controversial, there was a system kind of brought in through a character in Waypoint where they had this overlay that would show up on people's screens, which was a major point of the controversy, that would show these 2 dice rolls. And it would basically just immediately give the information to the player of what their kind of like position in the combat is, and they get to like kind of act out everything in the middle.
I see.
Which I'm personally, again, not a huge fan of dice being used to determine things like that, because again it kind of treads the line of like, well, how do you determine whether someone does better, and should they just generally win a given scenario, et cetera, et cetera. I very heavily lean toward player choice and agency on that front. But for something that is decided through some sort of like random chance or mechanic like that, I think that generally works well enough to be just like an informative output, right? It's this thing that's like it's very obvious where the 2 players are at any given point in time, and everything in the middle is just like, played out.
I think an implementation of like dice mechanics as such could work, and it really depends on exactly what you're trying to do. with the roleplay overall, right? Like if it's one that feels very gamey, then there's, I guess, like it would feel aesthetically appropriate to have dice rolls or whatever that would appear. Where if it's something that's much more emotionally driven or narrative driven, the dice roll is you as a character stating your case or doing what you need to do, as I guess the dice itself, rather than letting the dice move you.
In my personal opinion, I suppose I am, in general, fairly anti-dice. In my personal opinion, one thing that dice and like other sort of randomizational techniques tend to portray really well is unfairness, right? A sort of the uncaring unfairness of the cold, uncaring nature of the universe, where things don't go your way, right? And I think in like that sort of like survival role play where you want that like feeling of struggle and that feeling of loss and that feeling of like not being able to do anything. Sort of randomizational techniques, including dice, I think are quite appropriate because specifically, the dice are actually random and the dice will inevitably lead you into situations that are narratively dissatisfying. And not super interesting. Which if you are, if you want that sort of thing, because that's the sort of story you're telling, fantastic. On the other hand, if you have sort of like a sort of hero epic or like a grand fantasy or like superheroes where like people are saving the day, then at the very least I would be against using fair dice. Right, because fair dice once again are really good at making things unfair, right? Unfair for the players. And like if you have your like grand fantasy like heroic roleplay, I think the dice tend to generally very poorly clash with that sort of feel. Now there are of course ways to make randomization techniques work even in that situation, but generally it's going to be like gosh, shoot, I forget what it was like Mutants and Masterminds. I was looking at that was like one of the superhero role plays. There are like 50 billion ways to like stack the dice in your favor in that game because that's a superhero game and it does involve dice, and there are lots of ways to like just say that you succeed because you're a superhero, right? For those narratively satisfying moments. Generally, once again, dice tend to clash with those sort of heroic narratives, I think.
Right. So I'm gonna small aside because I keep forgetting to mention this to those that are watching or following along. You can at any point give us any sort of question that you want us to kind of talk about, and we will try to find the time to answer and give us our give you guys our input on what we think about the topics that are brought up within it. Just wanted to once again have that out there.
I didn't do this on purpose. I see. Last time I was doing it on purpose. This time I actually didn't do it on purpose. But I feel like the sort of like I did kind of start talking about narrative there, and I think that is probably actually a decent segue into the next topic, which was kind of plot.
Yes, that's true. So very very not on purpose segue to the procedural design.
Literally not on purpose this time.
We were really on top of these like very intentional segues, but getting an accidental one in there, it probably means we're just like, way too into the flow of segueing perfectly into things, I guess.
It was designed well,
Oh my god. Designed within our brains. Okay, so the procedural design of a roleplay is also very interesting, and it surrounds everything having to do with the plot of a roleplay, what actually goes on within the setting and the world, and what the characters effectively have to think or worry about within the setting, and like specifically looking at like how people actually get involved, because one of the biggest things, one of the core elements that people look for within something that's kind of continuing is like these forms of like character development, right? But what that really means is decisions, right? The moment a player or character makes a decision about something, they have developed their character in some way, uh, and that in its own way can be a sort of like reward, right? Depending on like how the player kind of enjoys their roleplay, what their kind of style is. Um, but that also depends on like what types of involvements that there are within a roleplay and like how a player gets involved. So something like kind of a mission style or module kind of style of running roleplay tends to kind of focus the main kind of plot involvements of a roleplay within like these kind of sequestered off areas, which means that like, well, only a set number of people can kind of participate in these, which means usually you have like the kind of group that goes there, you have people that kind of remain or that kind of run a support cast for those players, and designing around that is certainly, you've got to like consider how much of that roleplay is really attributed to those sorts of like sequestered off things, and how much of it can be based on the main map. I personally, I will always think first about like the main map itself, like how to most bolster the world as is within the place that people spend the most time role playing. Because like you can't just have plot all the time, every time without rest. I think that's like enough to exhaust anyone. Um, but I always lean kind of toward the potential of it happening all the time, uh, because then you you have effectively more value within the kind of bulk of your roleplay. So you're not kind of sitting around waiting for something to happen, right? That's I think a problem a lot of roleplays tend to run into, is, you know, we're in the main place, we just been doing the same thing for like hours and hours. We're just waiting for something to happen. Uh, the alternative is the things that happen are in the place that they spend the most time in. So that way, there is always something going on. There's always kind of plot relevant situations building within the space between, which then means people always have something to do, to build on, to talk about. And with the majority of kind of the space in a roleplay being social, that kind of fills in that social space. So it's not just empty space.
I think I think to your point of like plot not going on all the time. I think what actually is going on there, I think like the density sort of like high intensity stuff should probably depend on the length of the role play. Like if you have your, you know, short 2 hour one shot, it's probably okay to have you know, plot happening from beginning to end with no stop, right? In your short 2 hour one shot. In your, you know, weekly campaign LARP, it's almost certainly less appropriate for it to be, you know, constant action all the time. And you definitely want to design like spaces for rest into it. And by spaces for rest, it's not oh, we're going to have a chill session with nothing to do, because that doesn't work for the reasons that we've already mentioned. Players will fill that in with their own stuff to do. It's like actual sort of events that aren't like actual designed events that aren't specifically, you know, high intensity, or like the opposite of high intensity rather. Um, I think you kind of do need to fill that space with time to rest and recover.
I find this quite interesting because particularly the campaign LARPing that I do, there is plot, every single session, or at least a big thing that is happening. And it's like not world ending or sort of like session breaking, but there is like a constant like couple of problems that are happening that most players are involved in. Um, with only one hiccup being one time when an antagonist was introduced many sessions prior just for a player out of character asking who this antagonist was, missing every opportunity to get any piece of information about them, which was really funny and unfortunate because they were somewhat quite well, they should have been ingrained with that. Yeah.
So they kind of just
I must
lost every
ask.
opportunity.
I suppose I must ask, just so I'm on the same page. How often does this campaign LARP run? Just want to be on the same page.
We do 12 sessions bi-weekly, so it's every 2 weeks. So
every 2 weeks. Okay.
Yes.
This less often. It's still fairly regular. Interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's just the creatures that exist within my city who are appealed to it, or the creatures who run it, I suppose. Because we do give the players a lot to do, right? Where characters. I mean, if characters have goals, right, and particularly if they have goals and problems, they'll occupy themselves, or recruit other people to help get those goals done. And I mean, ideally, they should do so in a way where they're not using other players as tools. Where you could sort of, I guess, improvise that the plots were supposed to be merged, right? Where if you're looking for someone looking for, I guess, like their daughter or whatever, and it just so happens that they're sort of like been kidnapped in a house that another player that they've recruited that they've lost, where, wait a minute, this is connected to both of us in different ways. What does that mean? And then they can continue, I guess, like a shared story or a shared moment, provided that they, I guess, have the means to continue a connection, which, doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't have to be, constantly filled with drama or angst, but and I certainly find is more fun if there's constant drama and never a rest.
Actually, can you like clarify that? So is what you were saying there, because this is really interesting. So what you're saying, or am I getting it right that this was like two separate stories that like two different characters were
Yes.
pursuing, and they kind of came together, and who was it that merged the stories? I guess.
It was an example that I was just throwing out there. If I were to run it in real life, the GM would sort of blur some details that characters have previously stated to make that happen. Where in VR a lot of things are very player driven. So if the players are communicating with each other, or at least talking outside of the game, or even just improvising within the game, then it could be entirely player driven, no GM involved.
I suppose it was just interesting because like the way we're talking about it, like I've certainly seen like sort of like either GM driven or player driven stories, and then like characters joining into a story.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've certainly seen that. I don't know how often I've seen like stories merge together. So I guess that's an interesting thing to think about.
In a recent example that's happening in the campaign LARP that's being ran in my city, one player is running a sort of like a pseudo cult, but unbeknownst to them, many of those members are also part of other fringe groups that players are interacting with, not realizing that one of them is creating the terrorism that the other one is solving, and so their plots are quite connected in a way where they keep missing each other, but they're interacting with almost the same amount of, I guess, mentioned only or NPCs, where the information exists there, and other players have, I guess, witnessed these people individually and have the puzzle pieces that they could give to one or both of them to create that drama if need be.
So my question, I guess, to follow that up on is the two players that are effectively like they're each other's counters. Do they
Yes.
know out of character?
I I believe so. One of them is not turning up for the next two sessions, so it's a little hard to continue it now. But
Hmm.
I believe that they do. It's really hard to, I guess, keep track of everything in session, and it's equally as hard to keep things on track outside of the sessions as well, because players are going to message each other, and DM each
Yeah.
other, and as a GM, you can't see every, you have to have faith that these people are communicating, and just encourage them to keep communicating with each other so that
Yeah.
uh, things make sense.
That's fair. Yep. I ask because it's like whether or not they do kind of drastically changes, I guess, the dynamic of like when they do find out. Because there is a certainly value in like the element of surprise, right? Like if they both find out at the same time, it's this big scene. They're just like, "Whoa!" Right? Like
Yeah.
this changes everything, right? That's
Uh,
that's cool. That's
yeah.
cool,
Yeah.
right? We're
I, I,
also
I I
going.
suppose I have a bit more freedom with a mechanic that I tend to use that is, I guess, often used in parlor LARPs, or at least particularly the ones that I've been in. For plot is downtime, where players will submit their actions between the sessions, and then we give them back like a 3-page paragraph, 3-page essay on what that means, on what they've done, and what that could, I guess, influence. And of course,
Hmm.
with information comes misinformation, and so you can guide players to each other on uh, speculation, wild cards, and just crazy, crazy moments that you would otherwise not be able to simulate in session.
Okay. So I'm a bit curious now because we've talked about like a few ways that players can get involved in plot, right? Like you mentioned, like downtime, uh,
Yes.
and like I guess is that like I'm thinking whether or not that's like the only way that players get involved in this
Um,
kind of scenario.
I don't think it is the only way, but there does have to be something outside of the session itself, I guess, to push it. I think it's really hard to have um, only plot in only sessions to push a story continuously, because people will have to talk to each other, and they're going to talk to each other, and they're
Yeah.
going to have to, if you have like something that's within canon, right? Each time you meet is like 1 week apart. You're going to have to talk about the gaps in between. Particularly if someone says, "Hey, did you get dirt on this person?" You have to say yes or no the next session, right? And part of downtime comes with the concrete information that you have received. Where if you don't have something like that, you can just make that up, and it might work, it might not work. It really depends on, I guess, uh, how you're, I guess, like structuring the role play itself inherently.
Hmm. So I guess I kind of want to ask a more open-ended question.
Of
Now that
course.
we're kind of getting into those sorts of ideas, like
Hmm.
thinking about how players kind of get involved and or like rewarded uh,
Yes.
within like certain plot scenarios. Like I'm curious, like what kind of examples you can think of that were like done really well, and one that like uh, maybe didn't land as well.
I think it's really hard to reward players with something tangible. I think that's always a struggle. So most times where I've seen rewards, it's been the reward is the satisfaction of completing the goal. Um,
Hmm.
um, there was no way I should have been able to complete this goal in a one shot that I did, but there was a Vampire the Masquerade murder mystery, and it was a one session one, and most of us didn't know what Vampire the Masquerade was, and I was I did not know what the kabat was, which is apparently a thing that I should not have told most people. And if they knew what that was, I would have lost my goals. And so there was a bit of satisfaction of me not dying after realizing I made a mistake, multiple mistakes that would have resulted in me losing, but it led to me winning. And I guess that's sort of like a win and a loss, because I did feel as though I won that day, but at the same time, it was, I don't think, well deserved. It should have been executed differently by me actually researching more than just what's on my character sheet.
I'm sorry. Before I respond, I had to. I didn't have time to mute before I started laughing at my breath here. The clock's been reset. Vampire the Masquerade's been mentioned.
Yeah, it's been mentioned.
I
It happened.
Reset.
I'm sorry. That was great. Oh God.
if no one's got neon, I've got. Let's go.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Neon, you did this. Uh, no, it's that is a good point though. On like satisfaction of like the thing happening,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I would even expand it. To
Um,
go on.
Oh no, you continue. How do you expand it?
I guess the way I would expand it is like the reward of, I guess, having I guess in the sort of like more dramatic role plays, the being involved within the drama is its own sort of reward.
Yes.
The experience, like rewarding with experience, is kind of
Yeah.
what I usually think of first, in the sense of
Yeah.
like, how does a given player how does a given player take part and have these sort of bigger moments that people kind of generally look for in these sort of like uh, larger role plays. So I tend toward the larger role plays. That's
Yeah.
just kind of generally what I look at. And for me, this is kind of why I tend to think about maximizing the main space of the role play.
Mhm.
So I think like usually things that work well uh, tend to kind of look at how to open up the space so
Mhm.
that when people are involved in a thing, that it is open enough for people that come across it to be involved in it as if it were a part of the world. Which is why, like, when I think of like things that happen, like events within the world, I generally think less like specifically grabbing people to be involved in it, or like specifically making story weaves, and more so like I am placing this event within the world, and although I am thinking of certain players that may take interest in it, I will specifically only place it within the world, and whoever interacts with it will interact with it.
I see.
And my,
Interesting.
I guess my thought behind that is like, the more of those that you do, uh, the more that players will kind of be able to uh, differentiate between them as their character and say whether or not they should be involved in it. Because one thing that I found that doesn't work too well a lot of times is when these sorts of events are more rare, um, and if they are the only thing that happens within a world, and there's not like enough bolstering of like the in between times, then whenever something does happen, whenever there is like this big plot element and like things are in danger, or like people are kind of spreading around that something's happening, then like immediately players will flock to that, right?
Mhm.
It's like the classic of like in Neon Divide, when someone hears a gunshot, instead of running away from that, they will run toward it, because the gunshot means that something is happening, and therefore they want to
Mm.
see it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
You know,
I guess to wrap up very quickly. That's kind of my very long-winded example of like both things that can work well and things that can work poorly depending on like how it's executed.
so we've been throwing around the word a lot, right? We've been throwing around the word a lot, but I've got to ask at this point, just as a rhetorical question, I guess not rhetorical question, but just as a question to like get us discussing. But what is even plot, right? Like what is plot in the context of roleplay, right? Because I think it can be a number of different things, but that's a thing that I think usually kind of escapes design discussions in role play is like, people talk a lot about like plot and whatnot, like, but we don't really talk about what plot actually is.
I have a one-word answer:
Mhm.
conflict.
I
Yeah,
love me some conflict.
that's pretty good. I mean, I would have a two-word answer, and that's probably like meaningful decisions. Um, like
Okay.
Plot is kind of having like meaningful decisions to make, and then usually in the I guess usually it is like the conflict, whether internal, external, whatever, that makes it meaningful, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right, but it is kind of the idea that um, there are a lot of things then, like obstacles that you could like put in somebody's path, or like conflicts that you can create that like are kind of nonsense and not really meaningful and completely trivial. And I think that would be like kind of the opposite of plot, is like chores, things to do just just for the sake of it. Um, where it was plot is the collection of meaningful decisions that you go through a role play, right? Now a lot of plot, is probably, I suppose, usually traditionally it's probably the GM, or the organizers are probably going to be setting up some plot for people to follow. I do think, I'm a bit more agnostic about like, who's doing the designing. I do think players can essentially explore their own plot under my definition here, right? Like players can probably create meaningful decisions for each other, right? Um, but yeah, I think generally, generally, as an organizer, you want to try your best to make sure that every character in your roleplay has meaningful decisions to make, and like I guess conflicts to be a part of, things to do,
Mm-hmm.
that sense.
And in Couchform, it's like the kind of main driver behind those sorts of decisions, right? Like creating conflict that is thematic, right? Something that characters will already kind of be built in to have an opinion about, right? You have your core themes of the roleplay. This is where we kind of lean back on our previous episode of having talked about themes. These characters have these like kind of embedded like thoughts and opinions about like certain things that you can then create conflict around. And again, we mean conflict in a very like very, very literary sense, in that it is anything that evidences some sort of difference in perspective. It doesn't even need to be another character. It can just be like something in the road, like like a sign or something of the sort that creates a conflict for a character. And conflicts, like Scylla mentioned, are the things that make a character decide something. And if that decision is thematic, then it is constituting that character defining something about themselves. So that's where we kind of tie all that together. I guess thinking of like characters, this is another segue. This was only partially intentional. I recognized it halfway through it happening. So the next element of design to think about is one that you probably wouldn't think of as design, because it's not, the GM, although they are kind of relevant in setting this up, is not the one that's ultimately doing this. The individual design, which is the design of a character. So even you players are designing things yourself. You're designing your character and what the character is going to do and what your experience is going to be like within the roleplay via how your character is built and structured and what kind of things the character is interested in, so on and so forth. So it's like very there's this very kind of embedded understanding of like, what do I want to do within the roleplay? If I'm a player, like I kind of lean into like, what do I want to do? What do I want to experience? And like, how can I make that happen with my character? Like, can it work within this setting? And there's a lot of like, I guess, questions around that, right? I guess I can kind of pull the idea, right? Like, what kind of to kind of open up the space, what kind of aspects of a character might change how a player kind of experiences the roleplay. Open question.
Well, I suppose I mean the sort of individual personal design I think is a little bit of a difficult topic to think about, but I think one bit that I can definitely relate to here is I think this is an aspect of length of the role play, right? I think there tends to be a thing where I think uh, stories in general tend to age well as long as you're involved in them, right? The longer you're kind of like involved in a certain story, I feel like it does kind of grow on you over time. Definitely, I've seen this not just in like role play, but also in like Final Fantasy 14. Long running MMOs, right? You kind of like you're involved in a story for such a long time, you remember fondly. And I think the way this translates into role play is I feel like player experiences are definitely colored. Like player experiences of their own like place in the role play and their character's place in the role play is definitely colored by the length of time that person has been in the role play, like that individual person. Um, I think in some cases, campaign style LARPs can make use of this, but in other cases, I've kind of seen that like I guess level of attachment be kind of not really gelling with the story and the themes of the role play. Well, so in a lot of cases it can be positive and can be negative. It's just something that changes. Length of time is definitely something that greatly affects players' perceptions of their own character.
Mm-hmm. So like one thing that I found to be very interesting, I guess, once again going to kind of flip the perspective here and think of like issue then solution, looking at design. I've talked with a lot of players before who have kind of, I guess, gone through like the song and dance a length of time, and at some point I've kind of like realized that they are not having a good time as a character. They will kind of like maybe lament like not having much to do, or just generally not gelling with the character as much anymore. Maybe they've taken a route that they don't actually have fun with, or is a bit too kind of like emotionally taxing. And usually, kind of like my first response to that is to think, all right, well, first, tell me about the character, and like the response that I get, depending on like what the situation is almost always a response that informs me why they're having that issue. Because like I found that you can learn so much about like how a person approaches a character by how they define the character, how they talk about it, right? Like if for example, I've talked to a lot. This one's one that I get a lot actually. That I will talk to a player that is kind of looking for things to do, and I'll ask them about their character, and the first thing they will respond with is either the job of the character or their abilities. And a lot of times that doesn't include like what type of story the character is going through, what kind of like emotional sort of sort of backing there is to the character. Like what type of person are they? So I'll then like ask these sorts of questions, like based on like what they tell me, whatever like factions they're a part of, or kind of smaller backstory elements that they'll tell me about. I'll be like, okay, well, like why did this happen? How do they feel about this? Do they are they close to their family at all? Like, do they worry about this more often nowadays? Like things like that to kind of like bring out details. And a lot of times, like those tend to not be focused on. I find that a lot of these sorts of problems tend to come from like thinking about the more mechanical parts of a sheet versus like the characters. That there definitely been like a few points where I have applied for role plays where the more mechanics that were like needing to be structured within a sheet, the less the part of a character that like define the character actually really mattered. That they weren't like, I don't know, valued or even looked at sometimes. This is like the case with like Couchform season 2. Applied for that a couple of times, and like there were some points at which like a backstory or like any sort of like idea of what the character was completely optional. But all of the like strengths and weaknesses of the character were like completely mandatory. Very, very different kind of roleplay, because then it's like, that does inform, again, design informs everything, right? This does inform like what is the focus of the design and what will players kind of play toward, right? The more you kind of lean into the mechanical elements, the more people will use them. My cat is trying to jump on my lap currently, so.
You know what I think?
Here we go.
I think more long-running role plays should allow people to play multiple characters. I think, if you've been stuck playing the same character for like months or perhaps even years, I think you do kind of get like into a very limited perspective. And I think that might especially people aren't having fun as their character. You might be stuck in that very limited perspective and not be able to kind of like identify why you're not having fun because you don't even remember what brings you fun. I've been having a fantastic time over at Wardens. I don't even technically play multiple characters. It's just I was essentially playing an NPC one day as like a supporting cast. I had a blast, and I've started playing another character, and like I still play that character, and like switching back and forth. It's not even that I'm bored. Like I'm legitimately not even bored with like I'm not switching back and forth between characters because I'm bored with one and switching to the other. It's just because playing more than one character brings like such a texture to the role. Like it kind of brings variety, which is I suppose kind of spice to it. And of course, probably for depending on the role play, right? You might not need it, or in some cases you might not want it, depending on your design. I think like the really long running role plays, though, you should really consider allowing that, specifically for the reason of like people need different perspectives on like what the role play is like. So sometimes playing a new character might be like as different as joining a new role play, but you might not even need to join a role play to have that very different experience.
You could also, by playing two different characters, might find yourself with two different, I guess, character friend groups, and one of them certainly not interacting with another. For one of your characters not interacting with that friend group will certainly, I guess, contextualize, I guess, what those people are about while you are the other character, so that you at least have more insight on the other players playing as characters, rather than using that meta knowledge maliciously within the roleplay. You're using it constructively as well, which could, I guess, only exist by having more than one perspective through, I guess, your channels,
Yeah. That's as a whole conversation or meta knowledge that is, well, we could talk hours about that one.
Well, I think we'll get the chance. That's probably most related to playing to lift.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I totally agree.
Yeah, we'll mark that down. We need to
Yeah, write that down.
that week. Yeah.
I am a bit curious. I'll pitch another question to you guys, to you two, while we're in the mode of talking about this. Is there like something about like when you build characters, like is there something that you kind of focus on or like use to kind of build with that is like kind of core to your character creation?
I uh, I often find that I start making characters based on a gimmick, right? and I mean, you can you can only have fun with a gimmick for so long, and so um, if you start with like a gimmick for a character, if they have an injury or sort of they have like some weird quirk about them. Um, you can ask questions about why is that the case, and you can sort of start there from sort of maybe a character that I have played as a character who could not speak English. Okay, why couldn't he? And then I had to ask that question and sort of build from there. And so you can start with just like either I guess a cliche or a gimmick, or at least that's how I do that to get to an end result that oftentimes will see the initial gimmick be dropped, or other times see it as embraced as possible. Um, Particularly if I can make it last a little longer than 10 minutes.
Hmm. Just, I don't know why, but like the moment you said that, like, building off of like an idea that's kind of like a gimmick, I thought of like the Slap It the Clown comic.
I I would say, Otan, that you have like almost exactly described like my character creation strategy as well. Like I think I usually do that as well. I usually have like a gimmick or an aesthetic or like something that I'm going for that's not very charactery, and then I just go into the role play and usually heavily improvise my way through. I usually I would more so say that like I feel things out.
Yeah.
I go into the role play, and over the first like couple of sessions, actually, honestly, in general, right, I actually find excuses to like be alone in character, and just take that time to just go out of character and just really like think about how I feel and like how things are going,
Hmm.
and decide then what to do.
Yeah.
Like once I'm in the moment, I kind of like decide on what direction I want to go in. um
Hmm.
I guess I've started playing a character. Uh, their gimmick is that they're cursed and they can't express emotions, and like it was really like I this is the most I've ever written for a character, and it
Hmm.
still like fits into less than a page of like writing of like kind of what the character is and what they do.
Hmm.
But I've kind of been feeling out even the nature of the curse, like kind of like what the curse is and like what it does. I didn't have fully defined, and I've kind of just been going with what feels right in the moment, and
You can,
that's kind of yeah.
yeah, you can, I guess, also accidentally find, I guess, a character trait within the roleplay unexpectedly, and because roleplay is instant, it it's I think it's good that you cannot say, "Wait a minute, I didn't mean that." Where you have to just keep going forward, no matter what you, I guess, Um, I, I once, as a character, to avoid answering a question when someone asked me what a certain thing tasted like, because the sense of taste does not exist in VR. I just said I can't taste anything, and they said, "Oh, do you do you have no taste buds?" And I said foolishly, "Yes." And so now I have created a character trait within the moment, and that became, I guess, like something kind of interesting, and and that was something to think about, and also, I guess, research on. I guess to accurately portray something like that as well. So you can a character is never complete.
Yeah. It's like I love the idea of like you say the thing and then you just like immediately mute and you're like, fuck.
I
I
tried
don't
to
understand.
I tried to avoid one question and ended up getting six. And so I think there was sort of like some fun and also just doing that a bit more dangerously, where you will obviously say something that will provoke either within you or the person that you're role playing with or the people you're role playing with a character trait to manifest and sort of explore that both within the moment and also the next time that gets brought up now that you're a bit more prepped.
Hmm. I guess for me, like,
Hmm.
I'm similar in the runtime. I really enjoy being able to build dynamically and just kind of start from like a sort of small enough framework that I can say, okay, now I've made a decision about like a trait of the character based on something I said, and now it's just part of the character. It's nothing I would like. I would absolutely very heavily lean against the kind of like I've already decided everything about the character, therefore nothing can change. I
Hmm.
really dislike that. I really think that every character should be dynamic enough to be able to make decisions that like help define the character more. By which I mean like narrative decisions. So like the player decides to say something to answer a question like you did, right? And just say like, all right, well that's part of the character now. Like
Uh,
that's great, right? Because you
but
don't think of everything until you like really get in there. You start to like learn things about the character.
yeah, not only can you not think of anything both as a, I guess, organizing the LARP, but also as a player playing within the LARP. Um, I think that you as a character, you're kind of like a painter, right? You've brought the canvas, you've brought the brushes, you brought your skill sets,
Hmm.
but it's the world and the players around you that brought you the paint that you now have to work with.
Exactly. Exactly. We could go. We could basically
I
like lean right back on that. Like, no plan survives first contact with the players. Well, if you plan something as your character, like you could just not have that plan survive first contact with the players. I actually, to anecdotally support that. When I
Mm,
first played in Neon Divide, I played a character called Blake, who my first plan with was to effectively live out this sort of like uh, fragments of a past kind of story. I was going to lean more into the drama of like uh, missing the old group and like wondering where they went and seeing like kind of vestiges of them in other characters. And I tried that for like 2 sessions and just it did not land at all. It felt wrong. It felt stunted. The character's kind of personality did not match the sort of like effectively like mental defect that I was giving him. So like I just didn't enjoy it. It didn't pan out well, and I was like, I'm just not gonna do this anymore because it doesn't make sense as the character and for my
mhm,
experience within the roleplay to do this. So I just changed him entirely to something different. I kind of leaned into the
mm,
more industrial punk sort of vibe that I was already going for, just heavily kind of played into this. He's more industrial. He's very uneducated. He's rash. He makes these like really impulsive decisions and just doesn't care about what he says. And just the more I played into that, the more I just kind of enjoyed the role play. I had a lot more fun with it because it fit the character
mm,
more and it made sense more in the environment. To which I
mm,
will say, kind of once again going back to my approach, uh, the first thing that I do nowadays to kind of create that foundation that I play around with is I think about what I want to explore as a player, like what kind of
mhm,
story I want to go for,
mhm,
which kind of leans into what the issue was in the first place. But I think about it as like a guidance, right? Like
mm,
I think about like this is what the character would initially go through, and then I would just start from there. And then on top of that, my biggest focus when I'm building the character is like not necessarily thinking about what they can do, but what they already do and how they already see the world. So like the character that is my current profile picture is Orden Folio. Uh, a lot of me building this character was like setting up the most basic backstory possible for someone who came from this like noble background where he thinks everything is kind of like sunshine and rainbows, and then like thinking about how a character like that would interact with things around them, especially when the environment is vastly different. Waypoint is set in a very kind of small town where everyone's kind of on this like flat structure equal to each other, and this guy is like not used to that at all. He has,
mm,
this high position in a kingdom where everyone adores him, and he sees all of that, right? He has a very different lifestyle. So how does that kind of a person uh, see everything around him? How does he kind of conduct himself? Uh, does he see himself as the center of attention? Spoiler alert, he does. Uh, right, like things like that. Just really kind of digging into the mentality of the character, and then from there, it's just like, well, now I can just create everything about him. Like the whole gimmick behind him was something I built in character. The fact that he gestures like endlessly was like something that everyone kind of picked up on, like maybe later in the first session or like the second session, perhaps. But that was like something entirely built within the character, and it just became like his core identifier at some point that he would just gesticulate at everything. It's just the big thing. Like he makes himself look bigger because of it, and it's like building those kind of things. If I had just like stuck to the original sort of idea, I just wouldn't have gotten that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have one more thing to add to this like character design part here, because I suppose, and this one's I suppose a little bit personal, in that it like basically applies to like my way of building characters. I think in addition to like how we like to build characters, I think it's also useful to think a bit about like how we don't like to build characters, because I personally have really, really, really struggled creating characters for a lot of role plays. And I suppose I have a very particular reason for that. Last few role plays I've tried to apply to, and really most of the role plays that I'm aware with have like a very similar like kind of like a character sheet style that specifically is just incompatible with the way that I like to think about characters. Specifically, I'm talking about edges and flaws. And this is fairly like in the current VR roleplay space, like this is a really popular thing to put on put on your character sheets. Like think of like what edges, like kind of like what advantages or kind of like powers or abilities or whatever your character has, and also think about what flaws they have, kind of what drawbacks or whatever other thing that they might have. And I think this sort of this way of creating characters lends itself to characters that are exceptional in one way or another, right? Like, I mean, the edges are kind of built in, right? It's kind of like you have the sort of the hero, and they also have their Achilles heel, sort of, right? This way of thinking about characters and character design lends itself very well to that sort of character, right? The sort of like really heroic or like superhero or just otherwise exceptional characters, right? Um, Characters that are special within their setting. And I think if you are, designing a role play where, all the where you want all of your characters to be special, right? Then it might actually make sense. I'll actually I'll point them out. It feels kind of bad because I'm about to defend their decision to have this on the character sheet. I actually withdrew my application from Eden Lost for this reason, but I will actually defend their decision to have sort of edges and flaws on their character sheets, because Eden Lost, if you haven't heard about it, it's a academy roleplay. Specifically, it's like a military academy that's kind of training essentially the future heroes of the world that they are in. As basically, like they're going to be protecting these giant moving cities. The students are going to be protectors, and essentially it's a very sort of heroic type story. And I think the sort of edges and flaws method of thinking about characters works in that context. It works really well. In fact, it almost doesn't really make sense for a character to find themselves in the position of having been recruited to be, this, or at least it's hard to imagine, a character that's non-exceptional who would have been recruited to this sort of thing. Now, it's certainly possible and it could be interesting, but that almost feels like the exception, right? Where like a character that would not be exceptional in that context would be the exception to the rule, not the other way around. But in a lot of other role plays, right? Lots and lots and lots of other role plays, their worlds and their settings clearly have room for, and in fact, in some cases, encourage having characters that are kind of just like your average Joe kind of sitting around, just a person, right? And the edges and flaws way of thinking about characters completely and totally fails to capture this sort of character. My characters usually like I filled out a couple of character sheets recently, and usually over half of the character sheets is just me writing not applicable, not applicable, not applicable, not applicable. Because like the things that are important to like me and my character just aren't on the character sheet. And the things that are on the character sheet are just completely not important to me or my character. Um, I suppose I just wanted to throw this out there as like to any people who might be like designing a role play, right? This is, I think, one of those things that I think is tradition, right? The edges and flaws thing has kind of become tradition. Um, I would recommend thinking about why you have such a system, if you want to include it, because I think there are legitimately like valid reasons to have something like that on your character sheet. Um, but I suppose this is where the personal bit comes in. I literally cannot make characters that way. It's just does not happen. My characters usually, I can usually come up with like one flaw, and that's it, right? Like I cannot fill out the sort of edges portion for the life of me. For In fact, I would go as far as to say that being forced to fill out the edges portion on a character sheet would make me uninterested in playing the character. It would actually make me not want to play that character anymore. So anyway, just throwing that out there. Um, this, of course, is personal taste, right? So what I'm talking about here is personal taste. So it's not to knock anybody, who likes doing that sort of thing. It's just like consider, is this a thing that you need? Is this a thing that will benefit your role play, add to the themes of your role play? Is this the sort of character creation? What sort of characters do we want to create for this role play? Is a very important design question. Whew. Anyway, that's my soapbox.
I do like that perspective, which is how do you make a character as a GM in like a character creation as the GM, which I think is equally as important as the characters that get spit out by that process.
Mm-hmm. The question, how do I make a character that fits the role play, is a not an easy question to answer. I will not say that this is an easy question to answer by any means. But it is a question that definitely deserves an answer. In basically every role play, right? It's like, what kind of themes are you going for? What kind of like character aspects are actually going to like fit what the direction of the role play is, right? That's all design.
I think when it comes to, I guess, creating a character, don't be scared of like making a character that doesn't fit, or one that is like a little boring. You can be adventurous, or you can sort of make something that you feel as though isn't going to that might not, I guess, work, but not in a way that's non-destructive. Just like to sort of like see what does and doesn't work, and same with, I guess, making the process as well from a GM perspective is try new things and don't be scared if it flips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I looking at kind of like the VR roleplay landscape as a whole, I do feel like we have the exact opposite issue most of the time. In that like players will generally tend toward what doesn't fit more often than what does. In the sense of like the moment that there is a sort of like rarity or exception kind of like hinted at within the material that is presented for the roleplay. So like I've sent out the lore docs, and there's this one race that's like not necessarily like exclusive, but like different, like some sort of like in some sort of way against the norm of the roleplay. Almost every single time, players will disproportionately aim for that specific archetype and want to play exactly that, which does exactly inform another one of our principles. I think it's number 6. I'm not actually sure. which number it is, but it is one that we will talk about later on too. But it is it is one of those things where if you are, as the player or as the GM, thinking about creating something that doesn't necessarily fit within the square hole, although everything does. We all know it's a square hole, right? If there is something that doesn't necessarily fit within the space that it's meant to, think about why that's the case, and don't just stop at justifying that it's different for the sake of being different. Give reason to it, right? Because then that's how you'll get meaning out of the difference. That's how you get stories behind it.
Yeah.
Neon says, I like the idea of recontextualizing the edges and flaws into something else, such as how rare something is in the world, or how rare something is in the world is equivalent to the cost of something. I suppose that was like a character creation trick that she did show me in the past, where essentially, in order to create as the organizers, you can define that this trait is rare in this world, but instead of just saying that red eyes are rare or whatever, you actually associate, you have character creation points, or something. I just made that up. You have something where having these traits that are rare are come associated with the cost, and you can't stack all the rare traits on one character because it would cost too much. Right? You can't have a true unicorn character. If your character has the ultra rare red eyes, then they're probably going to be they're probably not going to have too much else going for them. Character creation DLC with pre-order bonuses. Exactly, Caroline. Exactly.
Can we get more character creation points based on the microtransactions that are obviously going to be implemented?
No roleplay battle pass. No.
Understood.
No.
RP battle pass. Unlock new skins for your character. So there is no segue for this part. And we are running a bit over time because we are great time managers and we're really good at keeping track of the things we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So zero segue into this one. It's kind of the last big one. It's talking about community design. And I guess to kind of platform this idea of thinking about community design, one thing I want to kind of put out there is how we generally design within VR roleplay, how we generally make our communities, which is usually we have some sort of server, usually Discord, that we organize on. We then gather everyone with maybe a dedicated role or some sort of way of signifying these people can enter the session, whether that's open or whether there's an application process or whatever. And then you get in the session through some sort of vetting or invite process or whatever. And then that's that's the general flow. Right. But then designing around that tends to vary a lot more. How do we talk to the staff members? How do we talk to each other? Are there open spaces to discuss roleplay? Do those open spaces also involve people that are viewing? Because usually we broadcast our points of view, and people like to follow that. So lots of ideas around that. And I'm curious, thinking about communicating with the staff of roleplay. I guess both of you have kind of been in both shoes, where you've been both staff and a player of a roleplay at some given point in time. So I'm curious, from both perspectives, what has been kind of your preferred style for maintaining that sort of staff to player or member sort of communication.
when I first did roleplay, the only way to message the GMs or moderators or devs or whatever you want to call them was through email. As
Whew.
I don't think they used Discord or Facebook for their group, and so the only real way was really, to just send an email and hope to get a response. Um, I We're no longer living in the past, so Discords do exist, and it is quite nice. And particularly being a character or playing a character, one that you love, it is really hard to not talk about them. Um, I'm sure both of you have had
Mhm.
great conversations about your characters and have heard other people speak longer. Because you kind of do need like that channel to, I guess, communicate with other players, and particularly a much more instant way to speak to a GM if there was a problem, or even if you're just wanting to say how cool a moment was that they helped facilitate.
Mhm. Um, in I suppose in my opinion and experience, I think that any role play that's bigger than just your close group of friends, I think I would aim for at least 3 channels of communication. I would say you should have your kind of public open forum, sort of like feedback space where like people can talk to each other, but also specifically to staff about like things that are going on. So public feedback. I think you should have private, personal communication. This could take the form of like private messages or DMs or whatever you want to call them, where like a player can like directly reach out to people and like message you about a thing. And I also think you should have private, anonymized feedback. It's like a channel of communication. The reason I think you should have all 3 is because depending on the person, depending on the topic, I think there will be a huge like difference in level of comfort like for each person of like what sort of communication they are both like willing and able to take. I think is very important. I think more important than anything is that as staff, you should absolutely communicate your intent that you do want people to talk to you. When I first got into roleplay, certainly nobody told me that uh, I was allowed to message the GMs. Now the GMs, once I eventually messaged them, were all nice and like everybody was there and like wanting to be messaged about stuff, right? But there was absolutely no indication in like the first few role plays that I was in that like you were allowed to even allowed to do that, let alone that was the expectation that you should message the GMs. You were just kind of supposed to know that. Um, so that's like one thing. I think staff should like first of all clearly communicate that you want people to communicate with you because you should want people to communicate with you. Um, but then even after that, I think you should have multiple channels open to allow people to communicate in the form that they are comfortable with. Different topics, once again, different topics, different people might be comfortable with different modes of communication.
The
And
mm,
I suppose to wrap up the thought, even if you do all of that, I can attest to that from I guess my experience in Worlds Apart. Even if you do all of that, sometimes it's still not enough. Sometimes you'll still get players who kind of are still uncomfortable. I suppose it's up to you at that point. How proactive you want to be about communication. I mean, I think staff should be like probably at least a little bit proactive. Obviously, you can't dedicate personal time for every single player in your role play, right? That's just not if your role play is big enough, right? If your role play is bigger than your close group of friends, you probably can't dedicate personal time for every single person in your role play as staff. But I'd err on the side of being at least slightly proactive.
Mm.
yeah, one thing I really like about like this is actually I've realized is becoming like less and less common, or maybe it's just like I haven't noticed how uncommon it was before. But like the public feedback forum, uh, I don't think a lot of groups really use that, but I think it is like essential to have that because what I find to be kind of the difficulty of like the private forms of communication is like accountability. So if I even if I'm like talking directly to someone, I don't know what's happening on the other end, right? I whatever they respond to me with, like whether it is kind of brushing the issue off or uh, personal attacks or whatever have you, like if anything goes wrong in that sort of process, it is contained, right? There's whatever comes out of that is like it can kind of go awry. But like when it comes to like having a public forum, that means that like any sort of action or like uh, kind of consequence or thing that comes out of that like process of players kind of talking about their experience is out in the open and there for everyone to see. So
Mm.
that kind of in my eyes creates this sort of like necessary culture of like accountability and understanding that like the runners of this role play are beholden to the ideas that players have and at least considering them enough and to consider their experiences and actually value them. Which
Mm.
we did talk a little bit about like safety and how in a lot of ways that is kind of like tangential and in some ways even integrated with the notion of safety in that by creating a sort of like safe structure, safety environment, we are effectively saying that we value the well-being and experience of the people that participate in the things that we create. So what better to evidence that than to have the forum that shows the accountability of the runner to the players themselves.
I suppose even more so than accountability, I think having that public space, right? Like if let's say, from the perspective of like somebody new joining the role play, right? Having like seeing a sort of public channel where your staff is like watching and like responding to player feedback, it's like, well, what better way to prove, right? What better way for you as staff to prove to your players that you want to talk to them, right? You want to listen to them, than having it there, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think just the even if it's not the primary form of like communication, I think the very presence of a at least somewhat active public forum will communicate that intention probably much more powerfully than any amount of saying, "Oh, we'd like to hear from you," right?
Mm.
Just having that channel available for people to see will communicate. Well, actually, yes, we are. We do care about what our players have to say, and we want to listen and kind of like hear and communicate to you with you, right? I think that very much broadcasts that intention.
Mm.
I've definitely experienced those sorts of pitfalls with the just private communication bit. And it's like you can kind of dance around having that public forum all you want, but in my personal opinion, I believe that sort of public forum should be absolutely mandatory in every sort of roleplay that runs for people that is not just a small friend group. With a friend group, you generally have your own kind of dedicated channels to talk to each other and can more cohesively build things. But when you start to bring other people into those ideas, into the things that you're building, then you start to require that sort of space to talk to each other and for feedback to actually go up the pipeline because it is not easy for people to figure out how to do that if it's not there. Even if like you can say like we value communication all you want, right? But if you don't like say how that communication is supposed to happen, it's still hard, right? That people generally don't have an easy time like manifesting that. Oh, because we value communication over here, I know exactly how to do that. This is the same problem with like workplaces, where I have worked a lot of jobs where the kind of one of the first things they said is we value communication, and the way they would do that sometimes is whenever you have a problem, talk to a specific person that knows the answer to that problem. And it was always private communication, but like the overall shared knowledge of the teams that I was on that used that sort of pattern was like really low as a result. And it's like, if that is the way that you value communication, then you have to recognize the consequences behind that. Like, this is what you're essentially sacrificing. So I always look at like, how do you create things that are transparent? How do you create things that are easily available to see? Like, if I wanted to know, okay, what is the designer of this role play? What is their plan for this role play? What kind of intent do they have? Then I would ideally know where to find that, because then I can say, okay, well, I see that this role play is intended to be a large and potentially messy and chaotic sort of experience. So now I know as a player whether I would enjoy this or not. Which is like our last really, really big point, is that everything is designed with an intent. Regardless of whether you recognize it or not when you're making it, there is always something, right? There is always an intent. And the best thing that you can do as a designer of the thing is to recognize that intent and to talk about it, because that ultimately will inform how other people engage with your stuff and whether they can like work with it the same way you would. Because I hold the opinion that not every roleplay is for everyone. I don't know if I can speak on that being a Couchform intention, but it is a potential interpretation. All right, that role plays are designed in ways to accommodate types of people, usually types of role play, styles of role play, which is to say then whether or not you enjoy a role play should be like obvious before you get into it, that there is a certain goal for what the design of the role play is. And then you can say, before you invest like all the time and money, because there is time and money going into like the pre-preparation stage of like getting into a role play, like, would I enjoy this?
Gonna sum all of that up with one word: communication.
Yep. Yeah, communicate the intent of that design, right? If you know what it is, just talk about it, put it out there.
Yeah, I suppose community design is probably actually like, in my opinion, like probably one of the places where VR roleplay differs from like IRL LARP the most, actually, because generally like the distance essentially between where the community is and like where the roleplay takes place is like where the organization happens and where the roleplay takes place is, I feel like, a lot smaller. Like you're usually like sat behind your desk at the computer, right? Like we mostly in this space organize through Discord. I think Discord is actually pretty fantastic for like community organization. I have gripes with Discord for the purpose of storing information. I think Discord, any information put into Discord is going to get lost rather quickly. If you put it into like any channel that has like posts added to it with any amount of like frequency, and that information is just gone. So I suppose that's like a big thing to consider when planning your role play, is like, well, how do I make my players aware of all the information that they need to be aware of? Discord generally, well, if you're not careful, right? If you're not careful, Discord can be very, 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 very bad at that. So yeah. I suppose I don't know if you have kind of any experience with the online organization stuff. I guess I've been running into like doing research on Nordic LARP, and like everybody in that space seems to use Facebook, and also everybody in that space seems to hate Facebook in the same way that like.
I guess it's like
I don't
easier
think
to hate
there's.
something that you use more, right?
This is true.
I don't think there's also a perfect, I guess, a medium to communicate all the information you have for your as well. Discord can only do so much. Facebook can only do so much. Printing everything else out and showing everyone all the physical notes and books that you've made still is not enough. It's just, I guess, how you work with the medium that you have chosen.
Mhm.
So
Ah.
this is actually an interesting point that Piri brought up. So I want to bring it up and then potentially segue off of that too, because this is a whole discussion in of itself. But I do want to keep it short as well. But the point that Piri made is that Piri thinks there is room for allowing info in the Discord, so long as there are sections of the Discord cordoned off specifically for important roleplay info. Though they think Q&A channels will always run into issues of losing info. I personally think like I'm on the yes and no sort of vibe as I am with a lot of things on Discord, but it's like very specific. Specifically depends on how you use it, right? One of the biggest biggest drawbacks of Discord is that like when you do organize info into like info channels, the structured way for Discord to like support that is to by default hide it in an info channel, which is read only, and kind of push up into like the server info sort of section. So like the then alternative is that you have like a list of channels or like maybe a forum or something like that. I personally actually don't enjoy the sort of like forum with just info topics, but there's like so many ways to do it, and like ultimately it runs around of like the issue of well, how do you then maintain the sort of channel height of your server, because that is like the like proportional measure to engagement of a server is how many channels there are, which sounds a bit silly, but it's like exponentially bad when you have like these really large sections where there's a lot of channels for everything that needs to be kind of displayed about a roleplay. You can get very far in the weeds, is what I'm trying to say. But the segue that I want to make is like, well, then the potential answer to that is to mess with visibility, right? You can give people certain roles based on what info they would have, and then like kind of curate the sort of visibility of a server to best support keeping the server sort of slim while communicating all the things that you need to, which then brings the question of like, does visibility work well for roleplay servers? I would lean no, in the sense of I think everything should be open enough to be visible to players that they might run into, purely on the basis that not having that information available to the person means that they cannot learn about it, and they cannot they are less informed when experiencing it, which is like kind of somewhat of a thought process and basis behind our understanding of like secrets and playing to lift. But that being said, something that's very important that is I have a very funny example of something that fell flat with it is like the one thing you have to understand when you have a bunch of information is how to direct people toward the information that they do need. I have the funny experience of walking into the Tales of Celestia server, where I popped into the server and I was trying to learn about the roleplay. And my first thought was like, okay, well, I want to know first of all where the roleplay takes place. I could not find that. Nothing in the server pointed me to where the roleplay actually happens. There's like a whole like 5-page long lore channel talking about all of the different nations in the setting, and that's like very well fleshed out and gives a good idea of what the world is. But nowhere in there does it say this is where the roleplay takes place. It's in this town, which is like it's just one of those things where it's like there could have been something that pointed me to this. There could have been something that pointed me to like how I get involved. But like these are questions that I have to ask coming in, which is just one of those like things. If you're designing a space for the roleplay, my first thought of advice would be to think about like if you were completely new to the server, what would you look at first? What would you need to know to like get involved? Kind of like minimum amount of stuff you would need. One thing I find is an issue is like it without that sort of direction, a lot of players will kind of like think I have to know everything, right? I have to read all these documents. I have to like understand all of this world knowledge to like even like remotely get involved, which in some cases is actually true. And I really dislike when that is the case because that is just so much. Especially if there's like mountains of documents. But when it comes down to it, like if that isn't the case, like some sort of like entry channel, or some sort of like way to direct people around that isn't like a question answer forum where the answer might get lost time and time again. I that is like essential, especially if you're compiling all that information together.
Yeah. I'm like eyeing the time, and I'm not going to take up too much more time because I think we should probably start wrapping up. I have 2 more things to touch on, and I will touch on exactly those 2 more things and do my best to not ramble here. First thing I want to do is I want to give people some homework. Yeah, that's right. That's the first thing I
No.
want to do. Yes, we're going to go to school. Because we're talking about community design here, and there is a channel that I suppose has personally inspired me. It has nothing to do with roleplay. Absolutely nothing to do with roleplay. But this video is like 1,000,000% applicable to I think all sorts of community building, and so I really want to shout it out. So the homework is you can go to www.youtube.com/squidschool. Squid as in the animal, and school as in we're doing homework right now. And on that channel, if you search community building in the videos, the first video that pops up is titled My Theory About Community Building. It's a 15-minute video. Absolutely wonderful. I recommend watching it. That's the homework. I will kind of summarize at least a little bit of what it talks about, and it's kind of the idea that there's an idea in this video about like your duty, especially as an organizer, but also just as a player, to like how what you do affects others in the community, and kind of like thinking about this, and really the ethos of community design being how do I bring in and like encourage people, as many people, to enjoy and participate in roleplay, while also minimizing the number of people that we drive away by being unwelcoming. And this is a very fascinating topic to think about. One really big thing, this one I want to speak very loudly about, is I'm actually going to pick on in-jokes. This is I think perhaps the biggest difference between a roleplay that is run amongst friends in like a very small group, and a more public roleplay where you're accepting like people into your roleplay. Probably the biggest difference of between those two things is going to be how you essentially how participants are expected to treat each other. Um, when you have a small, tight knit community, when it's just a couple of group of friends, the sort of the social norms that you're allowed to, that you can get away with amongst a small group of friends is much, much, much different than you can get away with others. It is very, very, very possible that you have a role play and somebody does a thing that everybody in this role play thinks is perfectly normal and completely reasonable behavior because everybody in that role play shares a culture and they're all in on the joke. But if you are the new person in the room who's there for the first time today and you're not in on the joke yet and like everybody's laughing and you're just confused, that can be one of the most alienating experiences to have. And basically what I'm like trying to get to with that is I think as somebody who is I suppose trying to run role plays for people who I don't know, right? I want to invite people who I don't know to my role plays and share this experience with as many people as possible. I find myself thinking about like, well, how does this look to somebody who's not yet like who doesn't yet understand the culture, doesn't know the traditions, doesn't understand the in jokes. How does this look to somebody who's new? I think that's a really, really, really important thing to think about. Um, I promise the video has more than just that. It's still homework. I've just summarized one point out of that. Tangent to the tangent. I think I would also like to talk a bit about like back to character creation, but this is slightly more on the community end. Um, this is another tradition that I suppose, for the reason I just talked about with the sort of in jokes, I take a bit of a critical eye to it. A lot of role plays in the current VR roleplay space have character creation channels that are private. That is like when you're applying to the role play and you're creating a character. Um, you post your character and the admins or the organizers get to see the character and like approve or deny, but that channel is completely hidden to anybody else in the Discord. I personally find this kind of I mean, at best it's just kind of at best I feel like it's neutral. At worst I can feel like it's a bit discouraging and kind of like anxiety inducing almost to like once again be the new person in the room and like not really sure what the culture is and like suddenly having to create a character. You have absolutely no idea what to create because the roleplay doesn't really have character creation guidelines, but also you can't you can't take cues from the people around you, right? You haven't yet spoken to anybody in this roleplay because the roleplay hasn't started and like you're new. um and not only that, but like you can't take cues, you can't take social cues from the people around you. I think in the absence of like really in-depth character creation guidelines, I think the if you also make your character like submission channel private, I think that's really, really not good from like a community aspect. Um, anyway, that's my personal opinion on that. It's something that I feel quite strongly about, though. As we know, Couchform, you know, is very anti-secret. So I'm I would err towards having more information be public than not.
Mm-hmm.
Whew. All right, that's it.
Yeah, breathe.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely wild that there is a relevant Squid School video for fucking everything. It really is. It really is.
Relevant Squid School video. Yep.
Yep. We have taken some ideas from that, as it seems like the relevant Squid School video comes up every time we start talking about something. That is also the case with Local Script Man, which we've taken a lot of inspiration for Couchform and its various principles. A lot of them were very, very, very heavily informed by like stances that were taken within the Local Script Man sort of content, which is this guy is like a script writer, right? So a lot of it is like very specific to film, but it talks about like how to kind of maintain these sort of like kind of cohesive and meaningful sort of experiences, and how to and how they affect the actual film itself. And a lot of it does very, very heavily correspond to roleplay, and some of it doesn't. One of the big things we also talk about is like, take inspiration, but think about like how much the thing fits, because not always can you like take something one to one and fit it to a different medium. You have to think about like, does this fit? Like, what kind of things would make sense in this space? I'm just looking at what Piri said in chat as well. Most new people that get hooked on the world, yeah. One of the difficulties I've heard with like having the privatized character sheets is that like, well, now I just don't really get to understand what other players are going for, and even not even like just being like a new role player, like even for someone like us who's been around for a few years, it's still very hard to consider joining a new roleplay that doesn't allow us to see what the other players are aiming for, because now we're basically just creating in a vacuum, and it can lead to this sort of like disconnect that when the roleplay does start happening, then we're all kind of aiming toward this like direction that we thought might have been the direction of the roleplay, but other people are going to think, well, this is my take on it, or this is my take on going away from it. And then suddenly you have people kind of running in a lot of different directions that weren't able to kind of build with each other. And then suddenly chaos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, especially, right? Like, I mean, this is something that people already do, right? Like, this is something people like kind of specifically friends, right? People who kind of like role play together frequently will message each other and kind of make characters together and like know what the characters are already, right? Because that's a good thing to do. It's great to have characters that are kind of like intertwined at the start of the role play. And it could be like that for everybody, right? It could like everyone could have that experience in your role play if only you you encourage that and you give people the space to do so, right? Because once again, people are going to do it through private means anyway, because I mean it's just a good it's just a good thing to do. I think as a designer, you might as well make it easier for people, right? You might as well lean into that rather than requiring the person to have like a specific friend in the role play.
So I think, we planned for these podcasts to go for 2 hours, and we were like, while planning some of these, we had actually like been a bit worried that we wouldn't fill the 2 hours for like per principle
How
discussions.
wrong we were.
Yeah, how wrong we were. I think next time we have to be a bit more strict on ourselves on staying within the time frame. But yeah, lots of discussion to be had on design. It is one of those very, very, very broad and very interpretable and very open topics that can be discussed in many, many ways. And we hope that this is kind of like open some eyes on how it can be interpreted and what that kind of means for VR and for the live action format that we tend to go for. Otan, I would like to ask you if you have any like last thoughts or anything you want to kind of speak on.
I think we've touched on quite a lot. I didn't really comment too much on the community stuff, but I don't think I have much insight to put there. But I guess for my final thoughts and opinions on everything is to just I guess it sounds dumb, but to when designing something as a player GM, do your best. Design things that you think are fun. Design things that you think could be fun that haven't been fun before, and just do as much as you can to innovate in, I guess, whatever space you have with whatever ideas you have, in hopes that something can come from that in a way that will enforce your story, your immersion, or whatever you as a GM or you as a player are trying to pull out of the roleplay. So do as much as you can to be as good as you can, I guess, is all I can really say at this point.
All right. I like it.
Neon Alligator asks, where can we learn more about all of your ideas and more about Couchform?
Oh, funny you should ask, Neon Alligator. If you would like to learn more about Couchform, the core of Couchform, which is our core principles, which is the subject matter of these podcasts, is in the Couchform principles document, which we have 12, I believe, listed out. Let me go ahead and link that.
You need to make like a stream, exclamation mark something.
I do.
I don't know.
I do.
Yeah.
I will make that my homework for this coming podcast. By episode 3, we will definitely have it. But for right now,
because we can put it in the video relatively easily, but
exclamation point couch inform.
exclamation mark couch and exclamation mark form.
Like inform as
Couch and form. Couch inform.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess. Couch inform. I like it. This couch is going places. All right, so these are the Couchform principles. These are the principles that we base our style of roleplay on, that very heavily inform and are interpreted to create roleplays based on the principles. And it is linked within the Couchform document, but Couchform itself lives within a server called the Myriad Discord server, which we are currently in a podcast channel within. And what?
I think Waffle has just posted next week's photo.
Oh my lord.
I mean, if we're doing safety, might as well have the most unsafe couch.
Oh Jesus Christ. Thanks, Wolf. Yeah, that. Look, he's got the bumper in front, right? Like, there's no way this isn't. He's wearing a helmet.
For those of you who are audio only, you'll have next week.
For those of you that are audio only, if you wish to look at the open chat of the podcast channel and check out what we're really referencing, check it out. There's a server invite.
It is a person erasing a couch down the street.
Like, the couch has leopard print on it. It is.
It's leopard print. It makes it go fast. Yeah.
Or is that cheetah? I don't know. I don't know my leopards or cheetahs.
It's like 2 pixels. I can't tell.
Okay, it's cheetah print. Waffle said, "Excuse me, cheetah print." Well, you're excused. So there you go. That is where you can learn more about Couchform and all of the additional information that we put out with it, including this podcast and any other mints of knowledge, like the video that Selin mentioned earlier, is posted within the Mints channel. It's just little things that we feel like are good information or advice or something to watch or listen to or whatever. Not necessarily official stuff. Before we end here, I wanted to ask you, Otan, do you have anything that is coming up that people can kind of look forward to? What are you going to be doing? Like what's the plan from here on?
It's strange because I mostly exist outside of VR, so for whatever I do have planned will only really exist once I get back into the scene and have have more opportunities to build. I have nothing planned, but I do have ideas of things I would like to at least try to do within VR. Mostly with one-shot LARPing, and particularly the theatrical style of LARPing that I enjoy writing, running, and participating in. So,
Well, I think you might be forgetting because I'm like sitting here. I think you might be forgetting the thing that's happening tomorrow that the two of us are participating in. Uh,
there's more. There's also this kind of thing that's happening. I don't know. It's kind of cool. If you like LARPing, if you like VR, there's also I've been calling it LARP Jam. It's the Scenario 1 Jam where it's a make a LARP in 2 weeks, and we'll run them all. So if you're interested in wanting to write and participate in LARPs, but mostly write, please get creative. But we're doing that in Scenario 1 as well.
Yeah, in short, both Otan and I are going to be judges on the upcoming Scenario 1 roleplay jam. Let me try to get a link over here as well. I think it might be easier for you to post this, Solus. There is the Discord. There is the rules. And essentially, it's going to be like kind of like a game jam, but for roleplay. We're going to have 2 weeks starting tomorrow. Actually, this is great timing to write a roleplay, and it's intended to be short form, right? Scenario 1 focuses on like short form stuff, but really, it's a thing for kind of roleplay design. So like honestly, if somebody submitted something that's intended to be longer format, I think I'd be completely fine with that. We might not be able to run a year-long roleplay, but certainly love to see the design. And I suppose with all the things that we've been talking about today with design, I think that's a good kind of stepping off point. That's kind of what the competition is meant to encourage, is to like experiment with different types of roleplay design and just see what creative things people come up with. And if you make something and you submit it to the competition, I suppose we have 4 judges. We're going to do our best to help you organize and run your vision, and we're going to like make sure that or do our best to run every single role play that is submitted.
Yeah.
I am not a judge. I am the odd one out here. I am not a judge of this game jam, so I cannot comment on what roleplay jam actually does taste like. But I'm sure these two would happily be able to help you discover the answer to that question. I don't know what it is. I'm sure it tastes great. Anyways,
seems that the invite link that you posted is invalid.
Oh no. Let me go ahead and create another one. I don't know why that one's invalid. It shouldn't be. But I will create one very quickly. Create invite.
But otherwise, I think that's about it.
Thank you for catching me after I forgot my responsibility.
And no problem. I was wondering if you're gonna say it. I was like, oh, there's nothing coming up. I'm like, really, nothing coming up. You say.
Yeah. Yeah. Happens to the best of us.
Yep.
This one should work.
Yep, it does work. All right, fantastic.
Perfect. All right, that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And next time, we will definitely try to keep to 2 hours. This time, we definitely hit 3. That being
4
said,
more hours. 4 more hours.
4 more hours. No. All right. Well, thanks, both of you, for taking part in the podcast. Thanks everyone for watching, and
Of course.
we will see you guys next time, where we talk about safety. Right? Safety. Yes.
Safety.
And what it enables, and how to do it.
Yep.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.